Good evening, Encore educators. So good to see all of you. Thank you all for being here with us. I'm thrilled this evening to introduce Priten Shah, author of AI and the Future of Education and CEO of Pedagogy.Cloud, for tonight's speaker series, The Future of STEM Education in the AI Era. But before I pass it over to Priten, I just wanted to share that if you're interested in accessing any of the tools that will be shared this evening as part of Pedagogy.Cloud's professional development suite, please be sure to stick around till the end and complete the survey in order to indicate your interest. And with that being said, I will pass it over to Priten.
Let me know if I can just get some thumbs up on the screen to share. Perfect. Cool. My name is Priten. Like Courtney said, I'm the author of AI and the Future of Education, and I run the education technology company, Pedagogy.AI. And today we have a lot to cover in a very little amount of time, but hopefully I can kind of speak to a lot of different folks in the room who have all different sorts of experience with AI and education, specifically in the STEM context. So I'm going to get right to it. If at any point anyone has a question, if you drop it in the chat, I'll try to periodically take a look at it, and I'll definitely take some questions at the end as well. And we'll have plenty of time to actually dig in and use things. So if the beginning seems a little rushed, it's because I want to make sure we have enough time for me to work with y'all one-on-one after you kind of get an overview of things. Okay, the about me you all can read later. You kind of know the important parts already. So what is AI? When we talk about artificial intelligence, we refer to the interdisciplinary field that seeks to create machines capable of mimicking human-like cognitive abilities. And that's the only part you really want to take away today, is that when we think about AI and computer science, we're thinking about computers that can do things like humans, or like human brains can. Lately, though, AI is not new. AI has been around for decades. And you've seen AI all over your lives. You've seen it in your Netflix algorithms. You've seen it in your Siri and your Google Homes. You've seen it even in how decisions are made by banks to decide who gets mortgage loans and who doesn't. But that's not the thing that's causing waves in education right now. What's causing waves in education right now is generative AI. So everything today that we talk about will be in the context of generative AI, and I'll define that in just a moment. But in order to understand what generative AI is, you kind of have to understand what an algorithm is, because that's what differentiates generative AI from all the AI technology that you've thus far seen. And so all AI is built on algorithms, which is basically a set of rules that a computer uses to make sense of data. And in the past, AI has used those rules to make sense of existing data and kind of replicate it. And so, for example, your Siri was really good at learning what it means when a human asks, "What is the weather like?" And so it had lots of data about what a human might sound like when they're asking what the weather sounds like. And they kind of put that together and developed the relationships between words and how we use them. Generative AI does more than that. It learns those relationships about how a human might say or ask how the weather is, and then it seeks to create new things. And so it's not just looking up the weather because it now recognizes that you're asking what the weather is. It's actually giving you a lot more context, right? It's actually creating more words around it and generating brand new verbose text. And so this is where the difference between generative, and I'm talking about text here, but this applies to images, video, sound. Generative AI can generate all kinds of things, but the kind of things we'll talk about today will primarily be text, because that's the kind that will be most important for you as educators. So this is a good point to just remember that because these algorithms are trained based on these data sets and they're learning the patterns in the data sets, what data goes into it makes a huge difference in terms of the quality of the actual output later on. And so if you've been listening to all the news about OpenAI and Google and Claude and all the various players who are trying to build the best algorithm, they're all trying to do so by training their algorithms on the best sets of data they can possibly get together. And so OpenAI, for example, was the first algorithm out there that kind of took all the data they could possibly find, and one of the largest data sets that have ever been used to train an algorithm, which included all of the written work on the internet. It included a lot of public domain books. It even included a lot of copyright materials, which is the case of a lot of lawsuits now. They kind of took all of the written work that humans have produced and used that to find all the patterns within it. And so that's where we saw the power of the generative AI really come to shape. And so this is the definition of generative AI when we refer to it today. I'll just keep saying AI because generative AI starts to get a lot more extra words than we have room for today. But it basically means AI that generates either text, images, or even music or sound by learning patterns from its data. So I've kind of already explained this, so I'll keep going, but you have this. If you'll get a copy of the PowerPoint later on. So if I skip over things today and you want to go back and slow down and look at something that's not a workshopping moment, that's definitely what I'll share the slides for later. But I think this we kind of have covered enough for you to kind of start thinking about what that might mean for education. So before I go there, I'm going to take a quick pause. And are there any questions about, do we have any general questions about what AI is or generative AI is before I move forward? Awesome. Okay, that looks promising. I will keep going. If at any point, like I said, a question in the chat always works. So I'll quickly go over what this might mean for education. And there's a lot of opportunities that this brings and a lot of challenges this brings. And so I'm kind of a middle ground person when it comes to AI in education. I don't think it's this magical solution to all of our problems that we've ever had in education that's going to instantly change everything. Nor do I think it's the worst thing ever that we need to completely get rid of from our education system. And you'll hear a little bit of that today. But there's lots of opportunities that it has. And for our students, it might mean enhanced personalization. I'm hoping that we can start seeing more formative assessments that are targeted to our exact students' needs, which means that they can target exactly what weaknesses they have, adapt to their learning styles, and learning styles not in the learning styles way, but learning styles in a more generalized way, and provide even personalized feedback as they're working through at home through whatever assignments they're working on. And that's the key here, is that there's a lot of opportunity for us to be meeting our students wherever they are, especially if they're at home practicing. If they're even in the classroom practicing, we can start using human intervention in much more methodical ways than we have in the past, and also make sure that every student is kind of getting some feedback while they're working through things. So I think that's one of the biggest opportunities that we have. There are also massive challenges. And so, especially in STEM, think about the intersection of STEM and AI. It kind of starts to bring up lots of questions about very specific uses of AI that are much more technical than, for example, in the language arts or history. And so when we start thinking about how STEM might be used for coding, or how it might be used in data science, or how it might be used in mathematics in general, the level of AI knowledge that you need kind of becomes a little bit higher. And so that's definitely one thing to think about when we're thinking about integrating AI within STEM education in particular. And then, like I started early on, the algorithms themselves are heavily influenced by the data that goes into them. And so a lot of the algorithms that come out there are replicating a lot of the biases that we already have as human society at large. And so when we're thinking about what kinds of things these AI algorithms are generating, what kind of text it's producing, who it's best serving, what kind of feedback it's giving, how it's grading things, we kind of want to take into account that it's trained based on what data it's been fed, and the data it's been fed is severely limited to like English language Western data. And that can dramatically change what kinds of results it produces. So a couple of opportunities for how you might think about it, and we'll kind of go through how you might do this, and we'll give you a chance to do some of it today. It's great for STEM when where formative feedback is very important and practice is very important. AI is great because it can help create lots of questions. You can create lots and lots of problem sets very, very quickly. And that allows you to provide a lot more exercises to students than you might have been able to in the past. It also codes. And so this is great because you can start kind of create some coding exercises. It can serve as a coding buddy for the students. Figuring out ethical ways to do that, we'll talk about a little bit at the end. But there are opportunities for students to use these as collaborative partners and not as cheating tools. And I know that's a concern that I'm sure a lot of you have. There's also really important things that STEM education in particular needs to do in terms of preparing our students to think about AI. And so this includes everything from helping them think through how AI is built, the ethical implications of AI, what data goes into it, what math goes into it, what an algorithm is, how the code is written. And so as our students continue to be exposed to more and more AI technology, we need to make sure that they actually understand what they're encountering and how they can be critical consumers of the technology and not just passive consumers.
Priten, this is Amy from Encore. So I think there's some questions on this side, and I think it would be a little bit more broader than how AI is typically used in STEM, about how it can be used as a research tool, and also maybe sort of doing like the data checking after like AI does things. And also like, if you don't mind just like slowing down just a tiny bit, I think it's a pretty important context that we're learning. And I just want to make sure everybody can like, pay attention and get all of what you're saying. So yeah, but if you want to, whenever you can answer Zach.
Yes, I'm looking at the questions as I go along, and I might just, any question that I know comes up later or is in the context of something else later, I'll just save for then, if that's okay. And I'm happy to slow down. Does that work?
Yes, thank you so much.
Perfect, awesome. Okay, so now the part that I think we kind of want to get into today is how might you use AI in your own workflow if you were to think about how you might use it tomorrow. And so I'll share the Padlet in a second. But the landscape of the tools that are available includes 3 of the major players in the field right now are OpenAI, Google, and Microsoft, and they all have very generalized text box. And so ChatGPT is from OpenAI. Google now has a tool called Gemini that used to be called Bard earlier, and Microsoft has Bing Chat. And so those are probably the 3 largest and most popular tools that you've probably heard of, probably the ones that you're seeing in the media, and probably the ones your students are using first and foremost. Then there's some more niche tools. Canva, if you've used for any sort of generation in the past for graphics or worksheets, is an image and text editing tool. It's like Photoshop, but it's much easier. And they have a lot of AI tools that include image editing, but they can also create like PowerPoint presentations from an outline you put in. And I'll show you a couple of those things today. Perplexity is the only one of these that's like directly, its primary purpose is to be a search engine. And so while all 3 of the ones on the left-hand side, OpenAI, Google, and Microsoft, their tools do have access to the internet, that's not their primary purpose. And so they might not always do that in the most efficient or the best ways. Perplexity's entire, it's built around being a search engine. And so it will do a much better job of getting you sources, pointing you to links, just kind of summarizing things, and getting you to the best resources on the internet and kind of also processing some of those resources for you. And so, for example, if you were to say, can I have the 3 best videos that explain the water cycle, Perplexity will do a much better job of like going through YouTube videos, looking through the context of them, looking at and telling you which 3 videos are good and telling you why those videos are good. And so that's a great example of a use for this that kind of extends into the education world. The bottom logo is for anthropomorphic. Their chatbot is called Claude. They're ex-OpenAI engineers, and they're kind of building AI around a different set of ethical principles, but they're actually becoming more and more popular as one of the mainstream, very active tools. The benefit of Claude is that it has a huge context length. And when we refer to context length with these AI tools, it just means how much text can you put into it. And so Claude lets you put in the most text possible. And so, for example, if you were to upload an entire high school textbook, Claude could actually do things with the entire textbook, whereas the other tools might struggle because it would be too long for them to make sense of the textbook. And I'll show you exactly what those upload features look like in a second as well. All the way on the right-hand side, we have tools that are really specific to education. On the top is our tool, which is both Socra.ai and Pedagogy.AI, which are student-facing and teacher-facing tools, and you'll see some screenshots of those today. Duolingo has language learning tools that are AI-powered now. They actually are built on OpenAI's technology. And then Quillbot has some writing tools that are meant to help students kind of process their writing process, outlining, and kind of work through the wording and grammar and syntax through a more educational mindset rather than just like, let me get the answers from ChatGPT mindset. And so this is kind of, you'll continue to see tools that fall into these categories. The number of tools that have come out in the last 2 years is probably in the hundreds, but there is absolutely no reason to even go beyond these right now. Anything you can do on any of those tools, you can do with one of these tools. And so it's probably best to stick to these, become really proficient with them before you branch out and try to figure out what the newest and coolest tool on the block is. So a couple of things that differentiate all of the different tools. So I talked about how Canva has some pretty cool features that I think are uniquely valuable to educators. The first is the presentation option. And so if you, basically this button right here that says Docs to Decks, if you create a document, you paste your outline in there and then click it, it'll actually generate an entire PowerPoint for you. And that includes putting graphics in there, formatting it, giving you titles, all those kinds of things. And so it'd be great to play around with that in a little bit. The images on the bottom right show tools that are specific to images. And so, for example, if you put in an image you found on Google Image and you want to make it animated a little bit, you want to grab a particular thing from the image, or you want to expand the context of it, those are some AI tools that are specific to photos. So if you're someone who uses a lot of images in your PowerPoint or in your classroom, those tools are definitely easy. It kind of helps you create the image that you kind of want as long as you get close to it on Google search. The top bar where it says like magic right, that's basically their ChatGPT tool. So this is where if you tell it you want a worksheet with 5 questions about the water cycle. I don't know why the water cycle is my go-to example today, but it will do that for you. And so it's very similar to how a lot of the other text-based generative AI tools will work. And the bottom left will just give you a PowerPoint template. So if you want to put in the text yourself, but you kind of want something unique because you're doing the water cycle and you want a PowerPoint that kind of has like it incorporates elements of like clouds and water droplets or whatever, the magic design feature will help you do that. So the key thing to remember about Bing Chat and Perplexity, and like I said, y'all, the slides will be shared. So right now the goal is for you to kind of get the context of what kinds of things might make something different. I wouldn't worry about like remembering exactly what differentiates each tool right this second. So Bing Chat and Perplexity both will cite their sources. And so that's extremely valuable, especially if you're looking for external resources or you want to have the sources before you actually, like if you're creating a PowerPoint outline and you want your sources that you can kind of back these things up with. But those are the only 2 tools that will actually give you external sources line by line. And on the left-hand side is Perplexity, and on the right-hand side is Bing Chat. Cool. I'm glad there's some excitement and folks agree that this stuff is really cool. So we're just getting started. Bard, which is now called Gemini as well, or instead, is Google's tool. And so if you're a Google Suite school, they have lots of integrations with tools you're already using, and that might be uniquely valuable. And so, for example, if you ask it to generate a table, there's a little button that lets you automatically export it to Google Sheets, which might be valuable if you're using Google Sheets a lot. Every single output that it creates has an export to Google Docs button, which means that you don't have to like worry about the copying and pasting and saving 3 or 4 links in terms of opening a new document, titling it, and copying and pasting. It all adds up across, especially a school year. And so little features like these might be enough for you to decide to use one over the other. We'll talk a little bit about having it write emails for you and things like that. If you're using Gmail, within Gemini, there's a draft in Gmail button, which kind of like pops open a new tab and automatically creates a new email draft for you. So these are little features that kind of start to make these things more convenient, especially if you already have a set of tools that you're already using. Finding tools that work well with it is important. This Bard will also give you search results with images. And so here we ask for like a fun fact about each planet and a picture of it. So it was actually able to pull a picture from the internet of each of the planets along with the fun fact. So that's a cool feature about Bard, is that it actually gives you real images. I don't know, ChatGPT will give you fake images. So if you ask it to generate, for example, like a fake galaxy, it will do a really good job of generating that fake one. Google will rely on the same images you would find on Google search, but kind of do that searching for you. The PDF upload feature is what I was talking about earlier in terms of being able to upload even a scholarly article, being able to upload a PowerPoint you've generated, being able to upload an outline that you wrote for your lecture. Claude and Perplexity are the 2 that allow you to do that. ChatGPT also has that in their Pro version. And so this means that you can kind of give it a lot more context. And so, for example, I can upload my entire book and ask it to come up with, what might the next chapter be? And so it can actually like process that level of text and kind of go through that. You might upload a chapter of a textbook and say, generate an assessment based on this. That's the kind of thing that is possible using the PDF upload on these particular sites. The other key thing, especially when you think about sharing with colleagues and having students share what they're generating with you, is that both ChatGPT and Bard allow you to share a chat link about the chat you're having with somebody else. And so there's a little there's like a little share button. And so if you're working through something and you want to show a colleague, you can kind of just not have to like copy and paste awkwardly into a document where everything looks jumbled afterwards. You can share the exact link and they can actually pick up where you left off. It's also, that might be something you ask students to do if they're ever using AI sanctioned by you, is to include the link of where they interact with AI so you can kind of see the conversation history. And that might be a reason to pick these tools over other ones because that option exists for you to see a live transcript. Yes, I can definitely share more. So the short answer for anybody who is finding the number of tools overwhelming right now is just use one. Like either pick ChatGPT if you already have an account on there. If you already have a Perplexity account or a Bing Chat, whatever account you have, just use it and don't worry about anything else. The rest of the features I'm sharing are for somebody who kind of is looking for something to do in particular. But 99% of things that you probably want to do, ChatGPT can do. And so then you do not have to worry about anything else. And that's probably the easiest way to get around the overwhelmed feeling of there's so many tools that I come out every day that I started tuning out to some of them as well, because you could only keep up with so many and they start to get repetitive at some point. So you're not really gaining too much by using a different tool. Socrat.ai was the tool that I talked about. That's our tool. This tool allows teachers to confine the chat to a particular topic. And so the students can then only talk about something in particular. So one of the problems that we have when we think about you having students directly use AI is that they can kind of go in and talk about whatever they want right now. So you might say, go talk about the water cycle, but Socrat might decide it also wants to talk about rocks, or the student might tell them they want to talk about rocks as well. Sorry, ChatGPT might. With Socrat, Socrat will not talk about anything else. So the student tries to talk about rocks or sports or whatever, it will kind of bring them back to the conversation that the teacher asked them to have. And that's kind of the way that it could make sure that it stays on topic. And there's a whole variety of different types of assignments that you can assign. Socrat could get something wrong. There's nothing that has 100% accuracy just yet. The accuracy rate of Socrat right now is 99.5%. Which is much higher than even most human teachers when they're interacting with students. And so we feel pretty good about that. But we are constantly building in moderation filters to do a second check or a triple check for accuracy. But we've gotten it up to 99.5% accurate right now. This is our toolkit, and this is what and yeah, Socrat if Socrat doesn't, sorry, I'm reading questions in the chat. I can read those out loud as well. Zach is also asking if Socrat will tell when it doesn't know something, and it is programmed to actually admit its mistakes or admit its lack of knowledge rather than just make something up the way some of the other AI tools do. But like I said, that 0.5% includes when it pretends to know something that it doesn't. The Pedagogue tools, and you'll see some screenshots of those, are the ones where they're geared towards teachers to generate something in particular. And so you've probably heard a lot about prompts and prompt engineering. And if you don't want to deal with any of that, we have a whole suite of tools that kind of takes you step by step through what you might want to put in to get the output you want to request. And you'll see some examples of that in a second when I show you how you might actually use this in a few minutes. Okay, so now, before I get into real examples of things that I want you all to try with me tonight, are there any questions about things I've said thus far? I'm sure y'all have burning questions about things beyond what I've said, and I promise you there'll be time for that. But I just want to make sure that everybody kind of feels like they're ready for the next step, at least for now. Cool. I'm seeing nodding heads, which is reassuring. If that's not true, definitely still drop a question in the chat. If you realize that I say something later on that didn't make sense, also a question in the chat. I'm happy to slow down a little bit and revisit that. So now I'm going to show some examples of how you might do things that you might want the ChatGPT or any of these other tools to help you streamline your workflow process. I'll spend a bulk of the time today talking about how you might use it as a teacher. It's much safer. We find the teachers are much more likely to want to use it themselves before they expose students to it. And so my goal today is to make sure that you feel proficient enough to kind of use it in your own workflow, not directly with students necessarily. And that way you're kind of building up the AI literacy yourself. You're kind of getting to use it to reduce your workload a little bit and make time for other things that are more important, both in the classroom and out. So this is an example of asking ChatGPT to generate a unit plan. And so here we asked it to generate a unit plan on the judicial branch of the US government. We specified that these are 10th grade students, that the unit should be 4 lessons of 1 hour each, and should be aligned with C3 standards. Now, I provided a lot of information here. Some folks will have gone in and tried to provide very little information and are a little disappointed with the outcome. So if you're someone who's tried using it and didn't get exactly what you wanted on the first try, the goal is to try to go back and figure out how much more information can I provide in that prompt so it can get closer and closer to what I want. And so it did a pretty good job here. This is from ChatGPT of picking up the exact standards. And so you can do the same thing with any of the national science standards. You can set the state curriculum, and it has access to the standards in its database, and then generates the objective activities and homework. Now, we might not teach this exactly the same way. I might look at this and say, oh, well, this activity seems like it would take way too long for one class period. But this is a great opportunity for me to start with something that's 70%, 80% done and just kind of tweak it, then to come up with something fresh. And so while it won't always be 100% perfect output, one thing to keep in mind when you're trying to figure out how to use AI tools for your workflow is it getting you closer to done than you were before, right? That's kind of one of the key ways to think about it, because we feel a lot of people get scared or kind of annoyed once it's not exactly what they need. But we kind of hope that you can start seeing it as a assistant that's kind of getting you really close, but not necessarily doing everything for you, because it won't ever replace you, which we can talk a little bit about as well.
Hey, Priten, I think there's a good, if you want to go back one slide, I think Micah asked the question is like, how much information would you need to provide about the standard? I think you were just saying that all the standards are in ChatGPT already.
Right. So most of the tools have all the standards. The more specific you are with the standards, the better. And so if saying C3 standards here was definitely better than not mentioning any standards. It might not have included standards otherwise. It might have included standards that my school doesn't use or my state doesn't use. And so, but if you have the standards in front of you, like if you're in your lesson planning document and you have the standards that you want it to deal with, go ahead and put them in there. Like the less it has to come up with or do on its own, the more it kind of is specified to exactly what you need. And so the same way that you would with another human, everything you have done already out, go ahead and feed it, and then let it pick up from there. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure they got that.
No, thank you. I missed that one, so I appreciate that. This is basically the same concept, but using the unit planner tool in our and the Pedagogy.AI toolkit. And so here we kind of, if you see the structure of it, we kind of ask you the questions that you want to think through before you generate a unit plan. And you kind of fill out the form instead of like having to draft an entire message. And then you get an output with a unit plan similar to what we just got earlier. This one kind of lets you edit in this doc in here, so you don't have to worry about like opening a new document then editing. So you can kind of go in here, bold things yourself, delete things yourself, and then ask it to iterate on that. So those are kind of the two key perks of using our tools. But if you're someone who feels proficient with like generating those prompts or feels like you're getting a good result, everything I show you today, you can still do using any of those mainstream tools as well. This is an example of a lesson plan for 8th graders that encourages inquiry-based learning on photosynthesis. Another example of where the more information I'm providing, the more likely I'm to get the result I want. If it doesn't know that I typically like to use an inquiry-based learning approach, it's unlikely to give me that on its first try. Including that from the get-go means that now it's actually giving me an inquiry-based lesson plan. So these are the kind of things that you kind of want to think through. What about your classroom? What about you? Would it be helpful for somebody, even another human, to know in order to kind of generate the kinds of things that you might generate? And try to include that information when you're using these tools. Okay, so before we move on, I'm going to give everybody a chance to actually do this now. So I'm going to go ahead and close my screen. And what I would like everybody to do is pick an AI tool. If that means nothing to you right now, I would open chat.openai.com, and I'll put the link in the chat. These websites will all allow you to log in with accounts you already have elsewhere. So my recommendation is to go ahead and use your Google account or your Microsoft account to log in, so you don't have to remember a separate username and password. And once you're within one of those tools, and it can also be Pedagogy.AI, and I'll drop that link in here as well. You can copy and paste that. Once you pick one of these tools and have an account on there, if I can get a thumbs up, it's a really large room, so I won't necessarily wait for everybody to give me their thumbs up. But I kind of want to see that most folks have an AI tool open before I start going through things that we might want to do. So just as a reminder, once you have one of these tools open, raise your hand or thumbs up in Zoom. If you raise your hand, it stays longer, so I can kind of keep a poll. Cool. Okay, this is promising. And if anybody's struggling, if you put it into the chat, I'm sure I or someone else can quickly help you through anything when it comes to opening an account. Okay. The task is to create your lesson plan. So if you already have it open, whatever tool you're using, try to see if you can, whatever, maybe a lesson that you have coming up, maybe a lesson that you recently taught, try to see if you can get it to come up with a lesson plan for that. And that can be in whatever context, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be in a traditional classroom context. If you're in a tutoring context, you might also ask it to come up with the best way to tutor on a particular topic or help a student review a particular topic, but still kind of give you a plan to do that. So whatever context you're in, try to have ChatGPT or whatever tool you're using come up with some sort of plan for you in order to like how you would do it. And then I'm going to share a Padlet link where I would love if folks could put in the results they're getting, as well as the prompts they're putting in. And that way we can kind of all see and talk about like what might we have done differently and what worked and didn't work. So that's the direct link. That's probably the easiest way right now. And I'll show you all what exactly the Padlet ought to look like in a second. Okay, I see a good chunk of hands. Excuse me. So I'll quickly show you what the Padlet will look like. So once you click on the link in the chat right now, you'll see basically a board, and here, if each person can kind of just put in the prompt they use. So make me a lesson plan on the water cycle. And then you can upload a picture or a screenshot of what you've made, or just copy and paste text of whatever you got from ChatGPT, and click publish. Folks will be able to start seeing what you did, and I can see them as well that way. And I'm also going to put up some sample prompts for this activity. So if you're struggling to come up with the words, here are some options. And you'll have access to these at the end of the presentation as well. So you'll have different variations of how to kind of go about and test out putting these prompts. So this can hopefully serve as a little boilerplate template for you to use to start if you're struggling. Well, if you want to drop all of these examples that I'm seeing in the chat here, if you put them on the Padlet, we'll actually have them after, so you can kind of like look at what everybody else created. You can also add more context there. So if possible, and I'll just bump that link up again. If you put it there, it'd be easier, but I'm happy to see them in the chat as well. The folks who are, I see a couple of prompts in here. If folks want to retry those same prompts, but this time maybe include more context about what grade level or how long the lesson is, what kind of like things you've already done this year, and see if you get a different response that feels more right to you, just as a way to kind of like test out what level of information is useful to provide. The other thing to keep in mind, especially as you're working your way, if you're using these tools for the first time, is these tools are built to be conversational, right? So there's the chat in ChatGPT is for the conversational component. And so they're trained to actually like continue to have a conversation on whatever it's doing. It's not really meant to be like a Google search bar where you put something in, click enter, and it's over. And so if you get something that's generated and you don't feel right about it, or you have feedback about it, tell it. Go ahead and send another message, and the way you would if a human sent you something over email, and say, actually, this lesson plan looks like it would take too long for a group of 30 kids, or this is a little too advanced for a 9th grade level, and see what it generates in response to that. You don't have to just get it right on the first try either. Cool. I'm starting to see quite a few in the Padlet. Nice. And if you want to comment on your own in the Padlet with like anything that surprised you or anything you were disappointed by, that would also be great. Okay. So I'll keep looking at these, but also want to make sure we get a chance to see a couple of different examples. So I'm going to go ahead and show a couple of different activities, but you'll want to keep your AI tools open. And if you find yourself like gravitating towards like getting the right lesson plan generated, you can keep working on that. But I'll just start doing a little bit on a different type of thing that you might generate, which includes like materials and activities. Cool. So this is an example of our worksheet generator. So again, this is where we kind of like provide all the questions for you, and then you kind of answer them and you get your output. And so here we're asking like what topic you're working on, what grade level the students are, and what kind of questions you want and how many. And then it kind of generates the worksheet for you from there. You could do a similar thing in ChatGPT. This is ChatGPT as well, where we prompted it to design a simulation activity where students are role playing as a local election board, and their goal is to increase voter turnout in their community. I love activities like this that would be really like difficult to do for one lesson as a teacher, because the amount of like planning it requires, the amount of materials it requires, the amount of like drafting of like sample text it requires is pretty high. But this is the kind of thing that ChatGPT does really well. And so you can now ask it to come up with little like, what we've done is like have it create an activity where students are role playing as like the Supreme Court deciding between the 3 little pigs and the wolf. But it comes up with little mock briefs, the amicus briefs, all those kinds of things. It kind of lets like create a bunch of material within a few minutes that we kind of hand out to the students to have them role play and kind of go through that process that normally would have been impossible to do for a 30-minute lesson in terms of the time investment it would take on the teacher's behalf. You can put your hands down if you are doing it because you have a ChatGPT account. And then if we can leave the chat for questions, I think just as I'm like presenting a bit easier. And then we can keep putting output you're getting inside the Padlet. Awesome. This is an example where if the actual data that you're using or the actual scenario doesn't matter as much as the skills you're trying to teach, another great use is to have it generate those kinds of mock things. And so this is an example of it generating a hypothetical archaeological site report, because if the goal is to kind of get the students to kind of do the analysis of it, creating this like ambiguous archaeological site report is much easier for the chat GPT system or any of these other tools than it will be for you. But you can do something similar with a climate report, with any sort of data that you kind of want to just mock up really quick in order to get them to practice through any particular skill set. Okay. I'm going to keep going for the sake of time. But what I would like is after this one, if we can, if folks can kind of maybe just like, I would like to hear from folks. So if you want to just like start thinking about what you noticed as you were doing this or any difficulties you faced, I'd love to just like talk through some of those in a second. So you can also use it to differentiate any lessons and materials that you already have. This is an example of Claude. And so this is the upload tool that we were talking about earlier. where it's used to differentiate change the reading level for a text. And so because Claude can take much longer text, we uploaded the text here and said, simplify this text to a 4th grade reading level. And it kind of went through the text and changed the vocabulary, syntax, and grammar to kind of be more accessible for a 4th grade reading audience. And so this is a great use if you see a New York Times article and you quickly want to get it, like, it should be a little bit more readable by your elementary school students. Even just to kind of differentiate the length of it and kind of get the point across still. All those kinds of things you can do using Claude much more effectively. And this includes putting in much longer text as well. So here we put in a quick short paragraph, but you can experiment with putting in a chapter of a book if you have a PDF of it, and having it kind of change the reading level there. This is an activity where we ask you to generate an activity where there's flexible grouping based on the student's familiarity with the topic. So another great idea where, like, if you're trying to, if you know your students are all in different places and you want to have a different activity for all those folks, but you kind of want to still be able to manage your classroom. This is a perfect example of how you might get some of those ideas from ChatGPT. Now, again, this might not be the exact 100% final output that you want to use, but just starting with something like this might get you to the point of being able to ask the follow-up question that gets you to a final activity that you might use. It might also give you some ideas to modify something you're already doing rather than come up with something brand new. And that is something you can also do. You can take something that you already have. So for example, if you have a lesson plan for tomorrow, or you have an assessment for tomorrow, and you want to put it in there and say, can you modify this to be XYZ, it will do that for you as well. So you don't necessarily always have to start from scratch. So you can upload your Zachary, I think that's kind of be up to you. So you can kind of say, like, I can give them a pretest. Tell ChatGPT that you can give them a pretest, and have it generate the pretest for you, and then sort based on the results of that pretest. And now all of that will be done in like 10 minutes at most with ChatGPT. And you'll kind of have the pretest, how you would sort based on that pretest, and the actual activity once you've sorted the folks out. So definitely the potential to do that. If you kind of already have an idea of where your students are at, or you kind of want to let students self-assess, you might not need to do that. But given that the difficulties of that, especially with younger students, it might make sense to make a pretest with ChatGPT. Okay, and then for creating assessments, exactly like we were generating some of the other things, this is an example of creating an exit ticket. So this is using the Pedagogy tools again, where we kind of like, this is a bare bones, like you just have to put one thing in and it kind of makes you a nice little exit ticket for what you might do. The more specific your topic is, the more specific your exit ticket will be. And so if you put in the exact standards you were going through, you put in the exact topics you kind of went over, that your exit ticket will be more specific to that. This is an example of having kind of brainstorm some different summative assessments. And so this one is for designing an end of the unit project for a middle school English class studying Shakespeare's Hamlet. And it kind of gave some pretty cool ideas that we thought were interesting. We thought that both the modern monologue and the alternative ending one would really get students to think more critically about what they had just read. But definitely an example of, like, if you're tired of getting the same assessment again and again, and you kind of want to figure out a different way to do so, you can use ChatGPT to do that. And you can also, so the question about repeating, you do not have to repeat in the same chat thread. So that is definitely an important takeaway, is that it can be completely conversational in any of these tools, where if you ask for something, it gives you something that's subpar, you can just tell it the specific things that are subpar without repeating any of the context you gave earlier. So you don't have to mention the grade level, you don't have to mention the topic, you can just say this is too difficult. And it'll make sense, it'll know that you're talking about what was just fed to it. For that exact same reason, a little caveat for folks is that you don't want to use the same chat for everything. We've had folks who have used one chat for all of their lesson plans. And you don't want to do that, because the structure of your earlier responses will actually guide its future responses and limit its creativity. And so because it's kind of using the context of everything that's already happened, once it generates one lesson plan for you, the next time you ask it for a lesson plan will be really similar to the first time. And so it might start to give you a really redundant set of exactly same assessments, but just kind of switch the topic once you ask it for a new topic. And so every task that you have that you're having to do, every final output that is different, you want to start a new chat thread for. Okay, it can generate rubrics. And so this is an example of a rubric that can be used in a 9th grade classroom to assess a 5-minute persuasive speech. And this is an example where I provided very little information. I didn't really tell it what like how many points my rubric needed to be on, what kind of criteria I wanted. And then if I specified those things, if I already had in mind exactly what criteria I wanted to grade the students on, or that my school uses a 5-point scale, that's the kind of information I would include in that initial prompt, so that when it generates this first draft, it's actually much closer to exactly what I want. But if you don't even have criteria in mind, these are all pretty solid criteria, right? These are all things that you might actually are exactly what a human might come up with in terms of the important things for a rubric for a speech. Okay, awesome. So I would want folks to keep going through and trying out the tools with all these different tasks. This is the unit plan prompts that we looked at. We can also look at, these are some lesson plan prompts. But I think why don't we all do an activity prompt now? So we should have folks try out materials and activities and see if we can generate a worksheet or some sort of like active activity for your classroom, or even generate more questions for problems that you already have to help students with, and see if you can get that and add that to the second column that we have in our Padlet. At the same time, I'd love to hear from folks while folks are kind of like muddling through and trying out these prompts about what you've experienced so far tonight. And we'll just do hand raises because it is a big enough group where I think it can get chaotic if everybody starts unmuting on their own. Yeah, go for it, Bill.
Yeah, this is actually a question, not a comment. I am interested in your advice in general about, you put in a prompt and you don't get what you wanted, What are your suggestions for modifying the prompt to get something different because you didn't achieve what you wanted? And I wanted to follow up on the comment you made about starting a new session, because some of these tools kind of track and they keep giving you the same answer, even though that's not what you want.
Right. Yeah. So I'll start with that second part. So you definitely want to start a new chat when especially if it's starting to get it really wrong. It's best to start a new chat, even if you're doing the same deliverable. So if you put in an initial prompt, you got the output and it was really off, and you realize, okay, maybe I should provide some more context on that initial prompt, not just give some feedback to this exact thing it generated. It's good to start over so that its judgment isn't clouded by basically what it already generated. If it's close to what you want, but not exactly there, then it's easier to just kind of give it that feedback because you wanted to build off of what it already did. If you wanted to scrap, I would start a new one, build off of, use the same one. That's maybe the easiest way to think about it. The other thing to think in terms of like how to improve your prompt, the chat systems are being trained on a daily basis to better pick up on what humans want. That is the entire goal for ChatGPT and the engineers behind it. Is that they're trying to build a bot that is good at conversations with humans. And so I wouldn't spend too much time like looking at these prompt engineering guides, especially for just like the kinds of uses that we've talked about today. That's not really where those kinds of nuances will come into play. And so you really wanted to think about, if you were talking to another human, a fellow colleague, somebody who was helping you out, how would you explain to it what it did wrong, right? Or how would you explain to them what they did wrong? And then just say that to ChatGPT or whatever chat you're using. You're much more likely to get your actual output than overthinking exactly what that first prompt might be. As you go through those steps, you'll start to see, okay, when I included the class size as the second thing in my chat message, it seemed to produce exactly what I needed for a group activity. Then next time you're asking for a group activity, you might intuitively include the class size in the first prompt in the first place. But it doesn't have to be so systematic. You kind of want to let your intuition play in a little bit and kind of think of it more as a conversation, because we're finding that folks get really hung up on like getting the exact right prompt, and that's actually slowing you down more than speeding you up. And so the goal is for this stuff to make your life easier, not harder. And so it's easier to just kind of have a conversation and get closer and closer, rather than like try to figure out this exact mathematical prompt, even if that's something like that exists. Did that answer both your questions, Bill?
Yeah, it did. Exactly. Thank you.
Perfect. Awesome. Anything someone ran into while doing either the lesson plan activities or the material activity prompts, or something somebody wants to try to do that they're struggling to figure out exactly how to ask for or get it to do? Awesome. And I'm seeing some formative activities start popping up in the Padlet, so that's exciting. Yes. Okay. So image generation in particular is going to be really tricky. Some of these tools are really good at it. Some of these tools are really bad at it. Copilot kind of struggles sometimes with getting an image generated quickly. And especially if you're looking for images that might already be on the internet, this is where I would recommend going. This is a very good use case for like Google's Gemini, because it will do a Google image search. And so if you're not really, if you're looking for like cell diagrams or something like that, where it's like you don't really need a brand new unique image, you can kind of use what's already out there, and you kind of just wanted to compile those images for you or insert them into whatever it's generating, I would go ahead and use Gemini and have it use real images. If you're trying to create unique images, it might be easier to chunk the task up. So if you're in your task, if you asked it to like create a quiz with multiple images, it's going to inevitably struggle with that all in one shot. So you might have to go through question by question. And that's one trick that I've sometimes used with any of these tools is when there's a large project that you wanted to do with it or a large task you want to do with it, you can have it break it up. So you can say, I need 15 questions from you, but I'm going to ask you for one question at a time. Say exactly the way you would for a human. And that would be your last line in the thing. And then say, start with the first one. And then it'll give you your first question, then say, do the next one. It'll give you the next one and keep going like that. And you're much more likely to get high quality output that you can kind of like give feedback on right away, rather than get all 15 and realize they were all wrong or like it messed up because I had to do too much at once. And so that's another option if you want to have images generated, is to do step by step. Yes, there are lots of non-educational uses of these AI tools as well, Zach. So a lot of these things could be easily modified for lots of peripheral uses that would be maybe more exciting and less stressful. Awesome. So all good questions. So the questions are about like how to format the output that it creates. If you're using ChatGPT, the top right has a little clipboard icon. If you click that, it'll copy it to your clipboard. Almost, I would say 99% of the time, I have seen it generate output that can already be easily put into Word documents. And so I wouldn't worry about telling it that you need it in a format that's like good for Word. If you do want something that will work in Excel or a Google Sheet, it is a good idea to tell it that you want it in a table format. So that kind of formatting tip is useful, and then you can copy and paste that. If you're somebody who uses Google Docs and Google Sheets a lot, this is another reason to like kind of maybe start using Gemini, because they're easier buttons to do these things. And so instead of copying and pasting, those buttons I showed earlier that kind of let you immediately export it to a Google Sheet or immediately export it to a Google Doc, that might save you all that extra hassle of like opening the document, copying and pasting if you find yourself doing that a lot. Microsoft Word, if you're on there, like there's like all these caveats to all these things because everything has a Pro plan and everything has like a particular, like some features like gatekept. And so if you have a Microsoft 365 account with a non-school account, you'll actually have an AI in your Word document itself. And that's an option for you to start using as well. That's not fully rolled out and there's some pricing differences there. So for now, I find it easier for folks to just do it in ChatGPT or one of these other chat tools and copy and paste it. Yes, we will talk. I really hope we'll talk a little bit about what students need to think about in terms of AI. So one thing that I told folks is that I will send there's a section of the PowerPoint that's specifically about student-facing things. In the interest of time today, we might not get to that, but the PowerPoint will include it regardless. And so if you want to take a look through those slides and email me a question about any of the student-facing things, if we don't make our way to it today, I'm happy to answer those over email, but I'll make sure that you at least have those slides. But I'm going to try and make it to as much of that as I can today. Okay, awesome. So I'm seeing lots of folks like putting in some prompts, getting some output. Any final thoughts? Does anybody want a few more minutes to play around with these tools? Anybody struggling with something in particular? Anyone want to share something amazing that they got the system to do?
I think while people give you that input, I think there's a good question about from King Dang about what are some essential skills that's for students to learn about AI and with AI so they thrive in the time of evolving technology. I think like it's a little different perspective than using an actual AI tool, but like if all our educators take one thing home and like, bring it to their classroom, what will that be?
Yeah, so this is what I was saying earlier is that there's a section of the PowerPoint that deals with student-facing content. If I were to give you like my 5-word answer, it would be that we need students who can like think. That is going to be the right, like If our students can't think and feel, which are like the two uniquely human components, they're going to be left behind. And so the more we can focus on like getting students who are like can control their own emotions, can express their emotions in healthy ways, can read other people's emotions really well, and then communicate with them while thinking critically, that will be the key skill set no matter what. So unfortunately, I think like career readiness might look very different in a year or two for what we're aiming for within our K-12 system and definitely our higher ed system. And it's likely going to mean that we try to make the best humans and not try to make the best like engineers or doctors or lawyers. But that's a little bit of philosophical overlay for y'all. Yeah.
I think one other question I want to bring up here is like, are there any effective tips for using these tools for providing timely and effective feedback to the students? Do you have any sort of suggestions?
Yeah, that's so feedback tools, we're still a little bit cautious about any tool that gives you a letter grade. So those can be like interesting for you to play around with on your own. You can ask ChatGPT to kind of do that. But the literature coming out about the actual like the consistency by which these algorithms are grading is really poor. There's no consistency and very little factors like 2 spaces after a period versus 1 space will dramatically change the exact grade it gives them, which like is not real. So this is where the fact that it's not actually doing any thinking or reasoning on its own, it is still just like doing like word math basically. It's going to fail at giving you grades. Feedback it does a much better job at. And so some of these tools like Conmigo is another tool that's student facing. Socrat, which is our tool, is student facing. Those are built to give students formative feedback. And that kind of feedback is much more easy for these AI tools to provide because it's not as there's not as much like subjectiveness to it. They can kind of give objective like, okay, like you got this question wrong. Here might be the right step to solve this math problem over like here's an A on your paper. And so that's that kind of feedback you can definitely do with some of the student facing tools.
Thank you.
I see a question. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I see a question about cost for subscriptions. Almost every single thing has a cost. So there's a whole range of these. Most of them average around $20 a month per tool. This is why I highly suggest folks pick one tool and not like try to figure out how to use 5 or 6 of these different tools. Your school might have a subscription with Google or Microsoft that gives you access, but that's still like very, very, very far and short. And then the other option is to kind of think through some of these tools you can use for free and get quite a bit done and then have one pro tool and kind of use that to like finalize things with. And so that's what most of our team does is we all have pro ChatGPT accounts and free accounts everywhere else. And so we'll try to do, if we need something in particular done somewhere else, we'll do it somewhere else, but we'll try to use ChatGPT in this pro plan because it is the best one by far right now. Well, by far is a little bit of an overstatement because Google has pretty much caught up in the last month. But yeah, go ahead, Bill. Sorry.
I'm teaching kids high school math, and I have been playing with ChatGPT during this presentation, and doing things related to math. And I'm not totally impressed with the outputs. And I kind of vaguely remember reading that ChatGPT is not very good at math. Is there one or another tools that are a little better at math things?
Yeah, so a couple of things. The free plans on all of these don't do math as well. So even the ChatGPT 4 algorithm scores much higher on all the math metrics than the ChatGPT 3.5, which is the free one that's available. And if you're looking for math work, the unfortunate answer is that you most likely will have to do one of the paid plans, either for ChatGPT or for Claude. Claude's the other one. And their free model scores much higher than ChatGPT's free model on math metrics. And so if you're still looking to play around with something free and just kind of get your like feet wet, and you're looking for math, I would recommend Claude over ChatGPT for the free. If you're going to pay for it, the paid ChatGPT is better. And I'm sorry that's so complex, but it's just the way these algorithms have ended up playing out. Google is also working on a particular algorithm that's just specific to math. That one should come out at the end of the year. That one I'm kind of excited to see how it goes. And the other quick thought on math is that ChatGPT Pro, the reason it does math really well is because it will actually it won't try to do the math through the language model that's built. It actually uses Python to write script in order to solve the math problems. And so that's why the accuracy rate is much higher with ChatGPT 4 than anything else for the math is because it's not trying to do math the way like a human would. It's just programming out how to solve the math problem.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, if folks are asking for my opinion on which tool to pay for, ChatGPT is still by far the tool to pay for. Maybe within 6 months that might change to Google, but the difference will be so marginal that if you will not be like at a loss if you become like comfortable with ChatGPT and are still paying for it 6 months from now. Yeah, that one, it is the one that's innovating the fastest, and its algorithm has been the best for the longest. Stan, your question about using student math responses as prompt, is this like kind of, is it like a picture of a student like solving a math problem and trying to get it to give feedback? If more context on the question might just help me answer it better. That is actually one thing we haven't mentioned, is that ChatGPT can look at like actual written stuff. And so like if you are solving a math problem on your work on a piece of paper and take a picture and send it to ChatGPT, it will read the text that you wrote by hand and give you feedback on that as well. So that is a cool feature of ChatGPT. Yeah, if your school has disabled it, I would use, I would use a personal Gmail, and then of course, it sounds like Amy suggested that they might be able to enable it on your NCorp's email as well. Yes, Copilot is still free. It uses the GPT-4 model. There's a message limit at some point, but if you're trying to play around with this, that is definitely another great. Bing Chat is definitely a great place to go. I would, if you're paying for ChatGPT, I would not pay for anything else. Sorry, folks are asking what the best application with Google is. Gemini will be the best application. If your school, we just someone ran into the issue where their school hadn't allowed them to access it through that account. But if it's allowed through your school account, Gemini will be the best. Otherwise, ChatGPT is still the answer. So in terms of authenticity, there's really particular data that like the computer scientists have put out about exactly how well all these algorithms score on various metrics, whether like on like they'll have them take the MCAT, they'll have them take the LSAT, they'll have them take the GMAT, they'll have it take like tests that are particularly created to test the mathematical proficiency of these algorithms. All of that data is available, but basically the algorithms are kind of all tied right now. And so if you're on a free plan for Claude, Google, or ChatGPT, you're going to get pretty much the same level of accuracy with that math caveat I mentioned earlier. And their pro plan will be all similar levels of accuracy. They're like single-digit percentage points away from each other on different tests right now. Awesome. And the answer to like the best app for what for any of these subjects, my answer will stick to ChatGPT unless you give me a really particular use case that maybe something else works better for. Okay. Okay, this is actually a good question, so I'll answer this one as well. The question is, are there ways to undo a change requested if the response seems even further from the intended target? And so if you look at your ChatGPT history, there's a little edit button on everything you've sent it. And you can actually go back and edit what you said instead of just giving it a follow-up message, especially if you're already 4 or 5 messages down in a thread and it was getting closer and suddenly it gets farther. That's a good use of using a little edit button and rewriting your response to it and seeing if it does a better job the second time. Yeah, so if it went too far away, Mika, I would definitely go back and edit your like second to last or your last response. Dan, this is going to come down to how well you write that prompt and whether or not you're using the pro plan. And so if you want to play around with this one, it's like I'll give everybody my email at the end. But if you want to send me an email with the chat thread, I can kind of suggest some options to see if it can get us closer to a sequential, getting sequential platforms. Okay, there's some more prompts in here for y'all to use. There are some examples of, someone was asking about feedback earlier. So this is an example of like constructive feedback on an essay. That can be done for a lot of different sorts of things. But like I said, I would stick to getting formative feedback through any of the AI tools and not try to get like any sort of like definitive grade. Or if you're like trying to grade like multiple choice questions or things that can be done better by other tools, I would stick to those other tools. So like Google Forms on quiz mode will definitely be better for grading a bunch of multiple choice questions than like uploading all those to ChatGPT. It's much more likely to get something wrong in that case. You can upload a rubric and ask it to do that. This is where like this might be a good starting place for you. I would not use it as a final turnaround. Anything with numeric like final output, you definitely want to check over twice, maybe even 3 times. Okay, so there's some prompts in here that you can use that can be used for things like drafting an email response. There's a nice one in here about like drafting a delicate message to a parent. So those kinds of things, you can, as you look through the PowerPoint and look at these different prompts, you'll kind of start to see and see, oh, like I often have to do this kind of task, and maybe I can use this prompt to streamline that task. So I'll leave these prompts in there for you all. It can create templates. This is a great use of the Google integration with Google Sheets. So if you ask it to actually make like an attendance tracker or a grade keeper, it will even do the formulas for you. So like if you're someone like me who doesn't really like to memorize all the really like random formulas in any of your Excel or Google spreadsheets, ChatGPT and Gemini will both give you exactly what you should put in there to get exactly the result you want if you describe the structure of your spreadsheet. Okay, this is an example. These are some formative activities that you can do with the student-facing tool. So this is where we start thinking about what interactions with students might look like if we were to use AI in there. And so this is the debate feature on the tool where the student is debating with Socrates about whether or not the SAT should be ended. And this is where you'll start to see that Socrates kind of models like respectful disagreement. So you'll see things like understand your point, or however, well, and however, or I see your point, but I must respectfully disagree. And this kind of like helps students kind of start to see what a intelligent debate might look like and kind of have their own individual debate with the bot. This is an example of a Socratic dialogue, hence the name Socrates. That's its initial purpose. It will continue to provoke the student to think deeper and deeper about whatever questions or topic that you've assigned them to think about. And even if a student tries to get away with like a couple of word answers, it will generate more questions to kind of keep getting them to think through it. This is where Socrates can role play as different figures. And so this is an example where like the AI is role playing as James Madison and the student is talking to Socrates as if it were James Madison and asking questions and having a conversation. It has a study mode. This is where like it will keep giving you, and this is one where like if anything that's heavy practice based, this is a great mode where it keeps giving the students like formative feedback on exactly what they did wrong, and then a follow-up question that's kind of testing the same concept or a similar concept with more practice. This is a language partner tool. Okay. Some more examples of how you might use it for admin tasks. I'll leave these in here. These are the kind of things I talked about earlier where it can craft emails for you. And it takes this like human tone. So if you tell it to be empathetic, if you tell it to be stern, it will kind of do that for you. And this is an example where we asked it to take an empathetic and understanding tone. And it kind of does those kinds of things where it cushions everything that's being said the way that you might want to cushion it. And so now you have a nice little email that's much more patient than I think sometimes we can be with our communications. This is an example of the Pedagogue tool for email response. And we actually have a drop down for what kind of tone you want to take in the email. This is an example of using it for your own professional development. And so this is quite a bit of a long prompt, but it kind of like uses feedback that that a teacher got from their evaluation, feeds it to ChatGPT and asks what the next steps ought to be in order for them to improve on that area. And so here ChatGPT kind of like outlays like 6 different steps that they might take in order to not get that same feedback again or improve on the feedback that they got. Helping with an IEP. So this is an example of like, this is an example of drafting an IEP. There's a tone mention, and it kind of mentions that exactly what the student is struggling with. Okay. Yeah, there's a question in the chat about Magic School AI. Magic School AI is a great tool. It's similar to what we do at Pedagogy.AI. And it kind of has various different tools for you to do some of these tasks that we just talked about through like pre-generated forms and a chat feature, rather than having to like prompt an actual tool. Their pricing is changing for the new school year, so I'm not sure if they still have a free tier up or not. But if they do, that's definitely worth a try if you're looking for something that's kind of made to make your life a little bit easier. Okay. This is just like a quick overview of things that if you're looking for more professional development on this, I'll leave the slide in there And you can kind of check out all the different resources we have. We have everything from like online PD options to in-person workshops to like courses and books. This is the toolkit that when it was mentioned earlier that you could have access to if you fill out the survey, I believe. And so this is kind of what it looks like. And you'll go to Pedagog.ai/signup. And that's where you'll have access to all those different tools. Where you saw screenshots of the form-based and not our like chat-based system. That's our toolkit. And then I'm going to quickly go through what is at the end of the PowerPoint for you all when you're at home, because there was not enough time to go through everything. But that way you kind of know the context of the slides that you're getting when you want to kind of like slowly sift through them. So there's a section in here about AI literacy, and we kind of go through what different activities you might do with students in order to teach AI literacy. Everything from like fact checking and comparing and contrasting. Some examples of activities that might make more sense in a science classroom. Including like having students like verify and refine AI generated reports. An example of that. So we have like ChatGPT generate a climate change report, and then the student's task would be to go find sources to back all that up or find things that are wrong in the report. And that's one way we're starting to get students to think critically about what AI is outputting and not just take everything for granted. Another example of that, biases. So these examples are in here. And then there's a section on setting policies and expectations. And so I'm happy to like stay on the call a little bit and talk to folks about this, because I'm sure folks have some questions about these things. But we have kind of a section on like how students are using it to cheat, why you should not use an AI detector. And that's definitely one that I'm very happy to talk about if you want to send me an email. And then we have some suggestions for like what kinds of policies you might make in your classroom for how to deal with AI on the student end in terms of what you allow and what you don't allow. Okay. If folks have some last minute questions, I'm happy to answer those and take those. And I'll drop my email in the chat as well. There's also a section on like the importance of all of this. I figured you all signed up for this and came, and so I spared the like why should we care about AI in STEM education. But at the end of the slide, if you're looking to convince somebody else of it, or your admin or a fellow teacher of it, there's some slides in there with some text about that as well. Any questions, anything that you all were playing around with near the end that you kind of want one more set of eyes on or talk about real quick? Any burning questions that that you feel like you must have answered today about AI in your classroom? Thanks, y'all. I appreciate yeah, there's so much to cover and so much to talk about. And I'm always happy to do more of that. So definitely write my email down and happy to answer any questions y'all have. But I'm glad it started. It hopefully starts some of the thinking that's necessary to get, you know, deal with something that's going to take quite a bit of time.
Yeah, thank you, Priten, so much. We really appreciate you coming and sharing all of your knowledge on AI, and thank you all for joining us. I'm actually going to drop the survey link in the chat now. As was mentioned, if you're interested in being reimbursed for subscribing to some of the tools that Priten shared from Pedagogy.ai, there will be a section in the survey to indicate that. So thank you all. Yeah, hope you all enjoyed the speaker series.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. It was awesome.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It was great.
I'm glad. I wish I got to meet everybody individually, but that's the nature of a Zoom workshop. But I saw a lot of faces, so it was nice to see all of you.